The sun was bleeding out over the frontier when they told Amelia she'd been sold. Not in those words, of course. Her father, Mayor Alton Voss, called it a treaty, a sacrifice, a chance for peace. But Amelia knew what it really was. She was 23 years old, standing on her father's porch in a dress she didn't choose, watching the road for the man who would claim her like livestock. And the worst part? She'd already been abandoned once before. Nathan Markley had promised her the world in the hayloft 2 years ago, whispering forever into her hair while the barn swallows nested above them. Then her family lost their land, and Nathan vanished like smoke. Men like him didn't marry poor girls. They married money, convenience, futures. Amelia learned to braid her hair tighter after that, to speak less, to make herself small and useful and invisible. But none of it mattered. Because now she was the price of peace between Hollow Bend and the Apache Nation, and the delegation was riding in at sundown. She didn't cry. She'd forgotten how. The dust rose first, then the horses, painted ponies moving like ghosts across the hard-packed road, and on them rode warriors whose faces held neither anger nor apology. Just presence. Just power. And in the center, riding alone, was a man who looked like he'd been carved from the red cliffs themselves. Tall, bare-chested except for a leather strap across his shoulder. No war paint, no feathers. Just dark eyes that saw everything and revealed nothing. "Taza," someone whispered behind her. The name moved through the crowd like wildfire. He'd killed a white lieutenant with a stone knife, they said. He'd fought in the border skirmishes. He'd refused surrender even when his people were starving. But standing there in the fading light, he didn't look like a killer. He looked like something older than violence, something patient. He dismounted slowly, his moccasins touching earth like he still believed it was sacred. His gaze swept the crowd once, then found her. He didn't stare, didn't smile, just inclined his head, a gesture so neutral it confused her. Because there was no hunger in his eyes, no possession, no pity. Just absence. The absence of all the things men usually wanted from her. Her father stepped forward, voice booming across the silence. "This is Amelia Voss. She's of age. She comes clean and willing into this union. Lie. Pure lie." But Amelia stepped forward anyway, because there was nowhere else to go. Taza approached with his hand extended. Not to take, but to offer. She looked at his palm. Brown skin, weathered knuckles, a scar across the thumb. No ring, no chain. Just a hand, waiting. She placed hers on top of it, and something inside her chest cracked open. The ceremony was nothing like she'd imagined. No minister, no scripture. Just a spoken vow in Apache that the interpreter translated in a flat voice. "I do not take. I stand beside. I do not bind. I walk with." Taza looked at her then, not through her, not over her, but directly at her. Like he understood that names mattered. That pain left shadows. That peace wasn't a gift, but something you built brick by careful brick. She nodded once. It was done. But what happened next? That's where the real story begins. They left at first light with no music, no farewells, just hoofbeats and the brittle hush of dawn. Amelia rode behind Taza on a small dun horse, her skirts gathered, her mind racing. This was her wedding day. She was married to a stranger, a warrior, a man who'd agreed to take her in exchange for rifles and silence, and yet he hadn't spoken a single word to her since they'd left town. The land changed as they rode. Brush gave way to red rock, sage, and grasses that whispered secrets in the wind. The sky opened up, wider than anything Hollow Bend had ever allowed. It was beautiful, terrifying, endless. By midday they stopped at a creek. Taza dismounted and helped her down. Not roughly, not possessively, just with steady, respectful hands. He gave her a flask of cool water and walked a few paces away to sit in the shade. Amelia studied him while she drank. His back was scarred, his hair braided with small bits of bone and copper. He didn't watch her, didn't try to charm her or control her. He just existed in the space beside her, patient as the stones that lined the creek bed. For the first time since leaving Hollow Bend, she took a full breath. They made camp as twilight turned the canyon gold. He built the fire. She unpacked provisions. Their silence wasn't awkward. It had shape, texture, rhythm, like two musicians who hadn't found the same key yet, but weren't rushing. When night came, he unrolled a blanket for her near the fire, then walked farther off and laid his own in the dust. Amelia blinked. He wasn't sleeping beside her, hadn't touched her, hadn't assumed anything. Her body had been handed to him like a transaction, and yet he left it untouched. Something inside her softened. Not into love, not yet, but into curiosity. She lay back, eyes open to the stars. They bled across the sky like spilled salt, so many she couldn't count them. A coyote called from the ridge, and in the quiet, she remembered her mother's words from childhood. Marriage is more than closeness. It is choosing to stay when you are free to go. Amelia didn't know what kind of man Taza was yet, but he hadn't taken anything from her. And in a world that had only ever taken, that felt like the beginning of something worth noticing. But could she trust it? Or was this just another cage with prettier walls? The Apache village sat between red cliffs and a winding creek, and when Amelia arrived, 100 eyes turned to watch her dismount. Some curious, some wary, none cruel. The people moved like water, unhurried, deliberate, shaped by time. No one rushed to explain. No one demanded she prove herself. The language spoken around her was soft on the edges, guttural in the center, and entirely foreign. But the quiet wasn't cold. It was simply what lived here. Taza said nothing as he led her past stone fire pits and stretched hides toward a small dwelling half sunk into the slope. It was modest, a rounded earth lodge with a willow frame door and the smell of ash and cedar lingering like memory. He gestured for her to enter first. Inside it was dim and clean. A low bed of furs in one corner. Baskets lined the wall. She moved like a ghost, unsure where to place herself. Taza set her things down but made no move to unpack them. Then he pointed to the hearth and the kettle beside it. He mimed fire, water, warmth. Then he stepped out. She was alone. Amelia sat with her hands folded in her lap, back straight like the good women of Hollow Bend had taught her, but her shoulders ached from holding dignity too tightly. She glanced around. Everything here had been made by hand, stitched, woven, carved. Every item bore marks of care. This wasn't savagery. It was survival shaped into skill. Hours passed. Taza didn't return until dusk, carrying bundles of wood and a wrapped parcel that smelled faintly of meat. He placed them down without speaking, stoked the fire, and left again. When he returned, he handed her a bowl and a wooden spoon, then sat a good distance away to eat his own. She tasted the stew, rich, earthy, unfamiliar, but nourishing. She kept her eyes down, but her ears listened. The crackle of fire, the chirp of insects, the occasional laugh from children playing outside. He didn't try to speak to her, didn't ask why she looked sad or whether she was afraid, didn't offer comfort she hadn't invited. In that stillness, something strange settled over her. Relief. No performance was required, no gratitude, no smile stitched onto her face like a favor. When night deepened, he gestured to the fur bed, then pointed to the opposite corner where he rolled out his own. No words. Just the space he offered her again. This time not for walking beside, but for resting apart. That night, Amelia lay awake, staring at the curved ceiling. Her world had been loud for so long. Men who talked over her. Prayers spoken at her. Expectations heaped upon her shoulders until she forgot the shape of her own name. But here was a man who saw her pain and didn't try to reshape it. Who gave her space instead of demands. Who held silence like it was sacred. And for the first time in years, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she could stop running from herself. But what she didn't know was that someone from her past was already planning to bring her back. The next morning Amelia woke to sunlight pooling through the roof opening and the scent of herbs in the air. Taza was gone. In his place was folded cloth with bread inside and a clay cup of water, cool to the touch. She stepped outside. Children ran past laughing, chasing a dog that barked with joy. An older woman watched from her seat beneath a cottonwood, her face deep-lined, her eyes clouded with age, but her smile open. Amelia hesitated, then walked toward her. The woman extended her hand and tapped her own chest. "Nayeli." Her voice was weathered, but kind. Amelia pointed to herself. "Amelia." Nayeli nodded once, then patted the ground beside her. They didn't speak more than that, but the woman handed her a small comb made of bone, and gestured to Amelia's hair, wild and tangled from sleep. Slowly, Nayeli began to braid it, fingers steady and warm. Amelia blinked hard. No one had touched her hair since her mother died, not even Nathan, who'd once claimed to love her. By evening, Amelia had learned to peel mesquite pods and not to swat at the bees. They weren't here for war. She observed the way the people moved, how even silence had structure. They weren't secretive. They were deliberate. Taza returned at sundown, a rabbit slung over his shoulder. He saw her sitting with Nayeli and didn't interrupt. Instead, he set about preparing food. When it was ready, he called softly. Her name this time. Not wife. Not girl. Amelia. She rose and joined him. That night after they ate, he handed her something that made her heart stop. Her journal. The small leather-bound book she'd been writing in since she was 16. She hadn't even realized he'd taken it from her things. He held it with 2 hands, gently, like something alive. "You wrote," he said, his English rough but careful. "I asked Nayeli to read." Amelia's breath caught. She hadn't known he could understand any of it. "I read your memory, your mother's garden, the boy who left." She stared at him. "I do not ask to know more," he added quietly. "I only think your words are strong." No one had ever called her strong. She whispered, "Thank you." He nodded once and said nothing more. But that night, as she lay awake staring at the curved ceiling, something shifted inside her. Her world had been loud for so long. Men who talked over her. Prayers spoken at her. Expectations heaped upon her until she forgot who she was. But here was a man who saw her pain and didn't try to reshape it. Who gave her space instead of demands. Who called her strong without needing anything in return. And for the first time in years, Amelia felt the weight on her chest begin to lift. But was it too good to be true? Because in the distance, beyond the ridge, riders were already coming. The days shaped themselves into rhythm. Amelia learned to grind corn between stones, to listen for rain in the wind, to walk barefoot without flinching. The children began to wave at her. One gave her a wildflower with a crooked stem. She tucked it behind her ear and wore it all day. Taza watched, but never intruded. When a neighboring band arrived for a gathering, she was introduced not as a prize or an outsider, but simply as Amelia, the wife who came without war. One woman clapped her hand over Amelia's and said something in Apache that made the others nod. She didn't understand the words, but the meaning settled into her bones like warmth. Not everyone welcomed her, though. One young woman, sharp-eyed and quick, whispered something whenever Amelia passed. But even that held no poison, only curiosity wrapped in caution. One afternoon, Amelia watched Taza teaching a young boy how to string a bow. The boy fumbled, frustrated. Taza didn't scold. He simply tried again and again until the child succeeded. Then he clapped once, no loud praise, no boast, and returned the bow. Amelia saw then what she'd not seen in any man before. Patience as strength. Kindness as skill. Love not as possession, but as presence. That night as they sat by the fire, she turned to him. "Why did you agree to marry me?" He didn't answer right away. He tossed a twig into the flames, watching the way it curled. "For peace," he said. "But not for them. For the children." He glanced toward the distant hum of laughter. "I do not want them to grow up learning fear." Amelia swallowed. "And for me," he added quietly. She looked up. "I saw you standing on that porch, alone, and I thought, she deserves more than chains. Maybe I can be less of one." Her throat tightened. He stood, walked a few paces, then paused. I will never take what you do not give." Then he disappeared into the darkness. She sat there long after, the fire whispering against the cold, her hand pressed against her own heart. Steady now. For the first time in years, she felt no need to run, no need to pretend, only a slow, growing warmth, a seed of something unnamed but alive. Not love, not yet, but something true. And then everything changed the morning she fell. Summer crept in slow as honey, thickening the air with golden heat and the hum of bees. In the stillness between dawn and dusk, Amelia moved like water through her new world. Her feet learned the shape of the red earth. Her hands bore calluses, not from burden, but from learning. She no longer woke startled. The ache in her chest, once a constant pressure, had softened into something quieter. Not quite peace, but near it. Each morning, Taza left before the sun broke. She'd find the traces of his presence, a folded blanket, a cooled ember, the scent of sage on the wind. He always returned before night, never explaining where he went. She never asked. There was trust in the not knowing. One morning, as she walked to gather yucca root with Naeli, Amelia tripped on a jagged rock hidden beneath dry leaves. She didn't cry out, just grit her teeth and tried to stand. But the sharp pains sliced through her ankle, and the world tilted. Naeli turned quickly, concern blooming in her weathered eyes. She whistled sharply. By the time Amelia blinked through the sting, Taza was there. He lifted her without a word, his arms steady and warm against her body. She hadn't expected the gentleness. His touch wasn't hurried, wasn't possessive. It was careful, like lifting something sacred from the ground. Back in the lodge, he placed her down gently and unwrapped her boot. Blood had soaked through the side. Amelia winced. "You stepped where stone hides," he murmured, his brows furrowed as he examined the wound. She half laughed, breathless. "Seems fitting." He looked up. "Why?" "I never see things till I'm standing in them." A pause. "Some things," he said softly, "are only seen after pain." He wrapped her foot in crushed herbs and cloth, hands cool and methodical. He didn't meet her gaze, but his closeness was a balm in itself. That night she lay back on the bedding, eyes tracing the dim glow of firelight against the ceiling. Taza sat near, his shadow a quiet sentinel. He spoke little, only offered sips of water and cooled her brow with a damp cloth when the fever came. Days passed like that, in slow turns of light and dark. Her body mended, and so did pieces of her she'd long abandoned. She began to speak in fragments of Apache, words for wind, for sky, for ache and healing. The children giggled at her pronunciation, but Taza only nodded, correcting her gently. One evening when she could sit upright again, he brought her a small bundle. Inside was a carving, a bird mid-flight, wings curved upward, etched from smooth riverwood. "I made this," he said, "when I was young, after my brother died." Amelia ran her fingers over the wings. "What bird is it?" He paused. "One that flies alone, but not because it wants to." She looked at him, something warm rising in her throat. "You still carry him?" "I do, not as burden, as shape. He made me what I am." Amelia pressed the carving to her chest. "I've been trying to forget pieces of myself," she said, voice thin. "As if grief made me wrong." Taza's eyes didn't waver. "You're not wrong. You are surviving." That night she dreamed of her mother's garden, the rows of tomatoes, the humming of bees, her mother's hands planting seed after seed in dry soil, whispering hope into the dirt. When Amelia woke, Taza was asleep in his usual place, not close, not far. She rose carefully, limping to the doorway. Outside, the moon was a soft sliver above the cliffs. The world was hushed, wrapped in silver and shadow. She stood there a long while, watching nothing, watching everything. Behind her she heard the shift of movement. Taza rising. She didn't turn, but she felt the warmth of his presence near. "You don't sleep much," she said quietly. He exhaled. "Dreams come late. Leave early." "Bad ones?" He nodded once. She didn't ask more. Instead, she said, I used to dream of escaping, then of returning. Now I just want to stay where I'm not expected to be anyone but who I already am. She felt him shift beside her, not touching, just there. You are not here to be anything but yourself, he said. The moon climbed higher. After a pause, she said, Do you miss her? He didn't ask who. My brother's wife, he answered. She died in childbirth. The child too. I'm sorry. He nodded. So am I. She turned then, slowly. His face was unreadable, carved by shadow, lit by ember glow from the fading fire inside. But there was no hardness in him, no wall. They gave us this marriage to stop war, he said. But it did not begin war. She tilted her head. What did? His eyes met hers. Fear, and the belief that we are different enough to hate. Amelia looked down at her hands. I used to think your people were fire and fury, but you move like stone, quiet, steady. And you, he said, are not breakable, only bending. She smiled, the first real one in weeks. I feel seen. You are. In the days that followed, Amelia's limp faded. She began tending the garden near the creek, a small plot of sage, corn, and squash. She found peace in planting again, in pressing her hands into soil without being told to. One afternoon she caught Taza watching her from a distance, arms crossed. His mouth didn't smile, but something in his eyes did. She waved him over. He walked slow and measured. Will you help me dig? She asked. He knelt beside her, silent, and began working the soil. Side by side they tilled the earth. In the hush between them something grew, not spoken, not demanded, just felt. She didn't call it love, not yet. But it had roots, and it was blooming. Then the storm came without warning, and this time it brought a face she'd hoped never to see again. The storm came without thunder. No clouds, no rain. Just the sound of hooves on dry earth and the smell of sweat and tension carried on the wind. Amelia was in the garden when she heard them, her hands wrist-deep in soil. She stood slowly, brushing dust from her skirt, heart stuttering in her chest. The Apache children playing by the river stopped laughing. A bird took flight from the cottonwood, wings flashing against the afternoon sun. They came from the east, dust trailing behind them like ghosts unburied. 5 men, rifles strapped across their backs, faces drawn. And in their midst, his hair slicked, coat too fine for this place, was Nathan Markley. Amelia's breath caught. She hadn't spoken his name in weeks. Taza stepped out from the lodge before they dismounted, shoulders square, gaze steady. He didn't reach for a weapon, he didn't need to. His stillness was its own kind of power. The tallest rider, Deputy Mace, raised his hand in mock greeting. We've come on behalf of Hollowbend. There's trouble. His eyes flicked toward Amelia. Nathan's followed, hungry and full of something she hadn't seen before. Not love. Ownership. Amelia's hands curled into fists. Nathan dismounted and stepped toward her. Amelia, he said, voice polished as though he'd been practicing it like a speech. Thank God you're alive. She didn't answer. We thought you were taken, that they'd hurt you. I wasn't taken, she said. And I haven't been hurt. The men exchanged glances. Nathan's mouth twitched. Amelia, I don't know what you think this is, but your father's worried sick. The town's falling apart. The Apache are being blamed for a cattle raid last week. 20 head missing. We need answers. And we need you back. Taza stepped forward, calm as dusk. We took no cattle. You expect us to believe that? Mace barked. Rustlers don't carry calling cards. Nathan turned toward Amelia again. Look, I understand you were scared, but this doesn't have to last. I told your father I'd bring you home. I meant it. He reached for her hand. She pulled it away before he touched her. I'm not going back, she said quietly. His eyes hardened. You can't mean that. Amelia took a step closer to Taza. I do. The silence between all of them cracked like dry earth. Mace spat into the dust. "You're saying you're one of them now?" "No," she said. "I'm saying I'm not yours." Taza said nothing, but he moved a half-step closer to her, not protectively, simply in solidarity. Nathan's voice turned bitter. "You think this is real? He doesn't love you. You're just a tool to him. This was a bargain, Amelia, a war leash. He's not your husband. He's your captor." Amelia's throat tightened. Her heart pounded so loudly it nearly drowned her voice. "He's never touched me without permission," she said. "He's never lied to me or left me behind. Can you say the same?" That struck. Nathan's face flushed. Before he could answer, a small voice called out from behind the lodge. It was a boy, maybe 7, holding a wooden toy tied with twine. A bell dangled from it, a rusted cattle bell. The men turned, startled. The boy ran forward, showing Amelia his toy proudly. "It makes noise," he said in Apache. "I found it in the arroyo." Mace's eyes narrowed. He took the toy, examined the bell. "Walcott Ranch brand," he muttered. "These cattle weren't stolen by Apaches. This bell's been broken a long time." Nathan looked away. The truth had undercut his fire. Still, he tried once more. "You don't belong here. You know that." Amelia looked at him, and for the first time she didn't feel anger, just distance, the kind that comes not from betrayal, but from outgrowing the lie you once believed was love. "I belong where I'm seen," she said, "and you never saw me." She turned to Taza, who hadn't moved, who hadn't spoken a word in defense or explanation. His calm was not silence. It was steadiness. She reached for his hand, this time not out of necessity, but by choice. He took it gently. Mace shifted uncomfortably. "Well, seems this visit's over." They mounted up. Nathan lingered a moment longer, as if waiting for her to change her mind. But she didn't flinch. And he didn't speak. They rode away as they'd come, carrying dust and defeat. When they disappeared beyond the ridge, the village exhaled. That night, Amelia sat with Taza beneath the stars. The fire was low. Her hand still rested in his. No words passed between them for a long time. At last she said, "I didn't know I was waiting for someone to see me, until you did." He didn't answer, but he turned his hand and wove their fingers together. That was answer enough. What had begun in bargain now flickered with something else. Not duty, not safety, but choice. And from that soil, something more than peace was growing. But peace, as it turns out, is never given freely. It has to be fought for. And the final battle was about to begin. The season turned. The wind softened. The earth wore green again, and the creek sang louder in the afternoons. Amelia stood by the garden plot, her skirts dusted with pollen, hands dark with soil. She worked without thought now. No hesitation, no second guessing. Each seed pressed into the dirt was a quiet vow. I am still here. I am still growing. The village no longer watched her with guarded eyes. Children waved without shyness. Niley brought her berries with a sly grin. Even the young woman who'd once whispered behind her back now offered Amelia dyed thread and a nod of respect. But it wasn't approval she sought. It was belonging. And it had finally, without ceremony, wrapped its arms around her. She felt it strongest in the little things. The way her name spoken in soft Apache syllables no longer startled her. The way her hands moved through the motions of living without having to remember them. The way she no longer waited for the world to ask her to prove her worth. And Taza. He was no longer a stranger. No longer the man she'd been given to. He was the man she chose each day. Not through declarations or touches, but in the space they held between them, tender and true. He carved her a comb of river bone and left it on her blanket without a word. She wove him a tobacco pouch from corn husk and embroidered it with a symbol for steady wind. He smiled when he found it, and nothing more needed to be said. But peace, like rain, was never promised to last. It came one morning with the smoke. Amelia woke to the acrid scent in the wind. Sharp, stinging, unnatural. Not from the village. From beyond. Riders crested the ridge, settlers in militia coats, rifles strapped across their backs. This time they weren't asking for peace. They had a name. Her name. Word had spread that she'd refused to return, that she'd married into the tribe, that she'd stood against her own kind. To some, it was treason. To others, justification for war. The men dismounted near the edge of the village, boots kicking up dust, rifles gleaming in the sun. Their faces bore the heat of fear dressed as righteousness. Taza stood with the other warriors, calm and ready. Amelia stepped between them. One of the settlers shouted, "We've come to reclaim what was stolen!" She didn't flinch. Nothing here was stolen. "You're a settler's daughter," another barked. "You belong to us." "I don't belong to anyone," she said. "I choose to be here." A murmur passed through the villagers behind her. She felt their steadiness. She was not alone. Taza stepped forward, not with a weapon, but with words. "There is no war here unless you bring it." "You married her for peace," a man snarled. "Then you broke it by keeping her." Amelia raised her voice. "They didn't keep me, I stayed." She moved beside Taza and took his hand. Not a symbol of obedience, defiance. Another settler leveled his rifle. Everything slowed. In a single breath, the village shifted. Warriors stepping forward. Children whisked behind elders. Bows drawn, but not loosed. Amelia did not run. She looked the man in the eyes. "This is my home," she said. "And I will not let you burn it down because you couldn't control me." The wind lifted dust around them. For one long, ragged moment, the world held its breath. Then a voice rose from behind the settlers. Mayor Voss. Her father. Older than she remembered, his hat in his hands. He stepped between the rifleman and his daughter. "That's enough," he said, voice rough with shame. "This was never about peace. It was about pride, and I've already sacrificed enough daughters to that altar." He turned to Amelia, eyes shining. "I was wrong," he said, "and I'm sorry." She didn't answer. Not because she didn't forgive him, but because some things needed no reply. The men, shamed or shaken, lowered their weapons. One by one they turned their horses. Smoke still lingered, but the fire never came. When the dust cleared, Amelia stood in the silence and knew what had happened wasn't just a turning point. It was a name being earned. That evening by the fire, Taza took her hand and led her to the village center, where the elders sat in a circle. He spoke in Apache, words that danced like flame. She understood little, but felt everything. When he finished, Nayeli approached holding a strand of beads and a feather dyed in river blue. "She is no longer Amelia of the settlers," the elder woman said. "She is woman who stayed. She is root that did not break." The beads were placed around her neck, the feather tied in her braid. Taza looked at her with the soft pride of one who had seen the seed and stayed to watch it bloom. Later, beneath the open sky, Amelia whispered into the quiet. "Did you ever doubt me?" Taza brushed a finger across her brow. "Not once." She leaned into him, not to be held, but to hold. They didn't speak of forever, only of tomorrow, because forever wasn't in the promise. It was in the choosing, again and again. And so the settler girl who had been traded like cattle, who had been forgotten and underestimated and nearly burned away, found herself not claimed, not rescued, but named. Not as wife, not as daughter, but as something earned, and that was love. Not loud, not wild, but truer than any vow the church ever wrote. It had no chains, only roots. If you enjoyed the story of a woman who found herself by losing everything she thought she needed, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment below and tell me, would you have stayed or gone back? And if you want more stories like this, stories about love that's earned, not given, make sure you turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.